I was nothing to him, less than nothing. A shadow that moved through the corridors of Ashford Hall with a bucket of water and a rag, my hands red from lye soap, my head bowed in the presence of greatness I would never touch. I knew my place. I had been taught it since the day I arrived at the estate as a girl of 14, orphaned and desperate, grateful for the mercy of employment. The Duke of Ashford did not see me. He did not see any of us. We were the mechanisms that kept his world turning, invisible and silent, and that was how it should be. Edward Ashford was a man carved from marble and winter, tall, severe, with dark hair that fell just so across his brow and eyes the color of a storm at sea. He moved through the halls like a god among mortals, his boots echoing on the stone floors, his voice low and sharp when he gave commands. He never raised it. He never had to. His displeasure was a cold thing, a withdrawal of warmth that could freeze the blood in your veins. The staff feared him. I feared him. And yet, I could not help but watch him when I thought no one would notice. Could not help but wonder what it would be like to be seen by a man like that, to matter in his eyes even for a moment. It was foolish. I knew it was foolish. But the heart does not obey reason, and mine had begun to betray me long before that night. I had been at Ashford Hall for 6 years when it happened. 6 years of waking before dawn to scrub floors and polish silver, of keeping my eyes down and my voice soft, of learning to move through rooms as though I were made of air. The other servants liked me well enough. I was quick with my work, never complained, and kept my secrets close. I had learned early that to survive in a place like this, you must make yourself useful but never indispensable, present but never noticed. The estate itself was a sprawling monument to old wealth and older pride. Stone walls thick enough to hold 1,000 secrets, corridors that twisted and turned like a labyrinth, windows that rattled in their frames when the wind came howling across the moors. In winter, the cold seeped into your bones no matter how many fires were lit, and in summer, the heat sat heavy in the upper rooms, making the air thick and drowsy. But it was beautiful in its way. The gardens were wild and overgrown, roses climbing the south wall in a riot of red and white, and the library held more books than I could ever hope to read in a lifetime. I loved the library. It was there that I felt closest to a life I would never have, a world of knowledge and beauty that existed just beyond my reach. Mrs. Dalton turned a blind eye when I borrowed books, so long as I returned them undamaged and did not let my reading interfere with my duties. I devoured novels and poetry in the few quiet hours I could steal, dreaming of heroines who defied their circumstances, of love that transcended class and convention. It was a dangerous kind of dreaming, but I was young, and youth makes fools of us all. It was late autumn when everything changed. The household had been in turmoil for weeks, preparing for the arrival of Lady Clarissa Pembroke, the woman everyone whispered would become the next Duchess of Ashford. She was beautiful, they said, refined and accomplished, the daughter of an earl with a dowry that could restore the crumbling east wing of the manor. The Duke had been seen with her in London, had danced with her at balls, had paid her the kind of attention that signaled intent. The housekeeper, Mrs. Dalton, had already begun planning the wedding breakfast, though no formal announcement had been made. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I was content to remain unseen, to carry out my duties and ask for nothing more. But on the night of the dinner party, when the house blazed with candlelight and laughter drifted up from the dining room, I felt the weight of my insignificance more acutely than ever before. I scrubbed pots in the scullery while the guests dined on roasted pheasant and champagne, while musicians played in the ballroom and Lady Clarissa floated through the rooms in a gown of ivory silk that cost more than I would earn in 10 years. I imagined her hand resting lightly on the Duke's arm, imagined him bending his head to hear some witty remark she made, imagined the life they would build together in these halls while I continued to clean them. I told myself I was not jealous. I told myself I had no right to be. But the heart, as I have said, does not obey. I had been assigned to the upper floors that evening, far from the guests, tasked with turning down the beds and ensuring the guest chambers were in perfect order. The work was quiet, solitary, and I was grateful for it. I did not want to see Lady Clarissa in her silk gown, did not want to watch the Duke smile at her in that restrained way of his, as though even his joy were a controlled and calculated thing. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. I was in the library, dusting the shelves by lamplight, when I heard the door open behind me. I turned, startled, and there he was, the Duke, alone. His cravat was loosened, his jacket unbuttoned, and there was a tension in his posture I had never seen before. He looked like a man fleeing something, though I could not imagine what a man like him would ever need to escape. His dark hair was disheveled, as though he had run his hands through it repeatedly, and his face was set in hard lines, his mouth pressed into a thin, bitter line. He did not seem to notice me at first. He crossed to the window and stood there, staring out into the darkness, his hands braced against the sill. The moonlight cast his profile in sharp relief, all angles and shadows, and I found myself unable to look away. There was something different about him in that moment, something raw and unguarded that I had never glimpsed before. He seemed, for all his power and privilege, utterly alone. I should have left. I should have slipped out quietly, melted back into the shadows where I belonged, but I hesitated, frozen by the sight of him, by the strange vulnerability in the set of his shoulders, by the way his breath fogged the glass as he exhaled slowly, as though trying to master some violent emotion. And then he spoke. "Tell me," he said, his voice rough and low, thick with something I could not name. "Do you ever feel as though your life is a cage of someone else's making?" I did not know if he was speaking to me or to the night itself. I stood there clutching my dustcloth, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain he could hear it. The room seemed to shrink around us, the shadows pressing close. The only sound the soft crackle of the fire in the grate and the distant strains of music from the ballroom below. "Your Grace," I whispered, "I did not mean to disturb you. I will go." He turned then, and his eyes found mine. For the first time in all the years I had lived under his roof, Edward Ashford looked at me, really looked at me, not through me, not past me, but at me. I felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, felt it strip away every defense I had ever built. His eyes were darker than I had imagined, storm-gray and turbulent, and there was a hunger in them that made my breath catch in my throat, made heat rise to my cheeks, even as I told myself I was being foolish, that I was imagining things. "You did not disturb me," he said quietly. "Stay." I should have refused. I should have curtsied and fled. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed. He crossed the room slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. He moved like a predator, all controlled grace and leashed power, and I was suddenly, acutely aware of how small I was, how fragile, how utterly at his mercy. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of tobacco and brandy on him, close enough that I could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the weariness etched into his face, the faint stubble along his jaw that suggested he had been too distracted to shave that morning. "What is your name?" he asked. I told him. My voice was barely more than a whisper, trembling slightly despite my best efforts to steady it. He repeated it, as though testing the sound of it on his tongue, and something in his expression softened. "You have worked here for years," he said, "and I have never once asked your name, never once thought to ask." "It is not your place to ask, Your Grace," I said, though my voice faltered. "I am only a servant." "Only," he echoed, and there was a bitterness in his tone I did not understand, a self-loathing that seemed to cut him as deeply as any blade. "Is that what you believe? That you are only what your station makes you? That you are nothing more than the work you do, the role you play?" I did not know how to answer that. I had never been asked such a question before. I had never been asked anything that mattered, anything that suggested I was more than a pair of hands to carry out tasks. I looked down at those hands now, at the roughness of them, the redness, the calluses that marked me as what I was. He reached out then, and I thought he meant to touch me, but his hand hovered in the air between us, as though he were afraid of what would happen if he closed the distance. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the war between desire and duty, between the man he was and the man he was expected to be. His fingers trembled slightly, and I realized with a shock that he was afraid of what he wanted, afraid of what it would cost him. And then, as though some invisible thread had snapped, he stepped back. He turned away from me, his jaw tight, his hands curling into fists at his sides, the knuckles white with tension. "Forgive me," he said, his voice cold once more, the warmth that had briefly flickered there now extinguished. "You may go." I fled. I ran through the darkened corridors, my heart in my throat, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the lamp. The flame guttered and danced, casting wild shadows on the walls, and I felt as though I were running through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, where nothing made sense and everything was turned upside down. I did not understand what had just happened. I did not understand why he had looked at me that way, why he had spoken to me as though I were a person and not a piece of furniture. And I did not understand why, even as I told myself to forget it, to bury it deep and never think of it again, I could not stop the tears that slid down my cheeks as I lay in my narrow bed that night, staring at the ceiling and wishing for something I could never have. But that was only the beginning. The Duke had seen me now, and once a man like Edward Ashford sets his eyes on something, he does not look away. 2 weeks later, Lady Clarissa left Ashford Hall in tears, the engagement everyone had anticipated, never to be spoken of again. The staff whispered about a quarrel, about harsh words exchanged in the drawing room, about the Duke's sudden coldness toward the woman who had been destined to be his bride. Mrs. Dalton said he had lost his mind, that he was throwing away his future for reasons no one could fathom. Cook said it was a scandal, that the lady's family would never forgive the insult. The footman speculated that there had been another woman, though they could not imagine who. But I knew. God help me, I knew. Because the night after Lady Clarissa departed, the Duke summoned me to his study. And this time, when he looked at me, he did not look away. The summons came in the form of a note, delivered by one of the footmen just as I was finishing my evening duties. The paper was thick and expensive, the handwriting bold and precise, and it bore the Duke's seal pressed into dark wax. My hands shook as I broke it open, as I read the simple command written there. "Come to my study at 10 o'clock. Tell no one." I almost did not go. I stood in my small room beneath the eaves. The note crumpled in my fist and considered running. I could leave Ashford Hall, find work in another household, disappear into the anonymity of London or some distant village where no one knew my name. But even as the thought formed, I knew I would not act on it. Some part of me, some foolish, reckless part, wanted to know what would happen if I went to him. Wanted to see if the look in his eyes that night in the library had been real, or if I had imagined it, conjured it from my own desperate longing. So when the clock struck 10, I found myself standing outside his study door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break free of my chest. I raised my hand to knock, hesitated, then forced myself to rap softly against the wood. "Enter," came his voice from within. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me as he had instructed in his note. The room was warm, lit by the glow of a fire and a single lamp on his desk. He stood by the window, his back to me, his hands clasped behind him. He was still dressed in his evening clothes, though his jacket had been discarded and his shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing strong forearms marked with fine dark hair. I had never seen him so informal, so human, and the sight made something twist painfully in my chest. For a long moment, he did not turn around. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of wind outside. I stood just inside the door, my hands folded in front of me, waiting. I had learned patience in my years of service, had learned to stand and wait for as long as was required, to make no sound, to ask no questions. But this waiting was different. This waiting felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one more step would send me plummeting into an abyss from which there would be no return. Finally, he spoke. "I have been thinking about you," he said, his voice low and rough, as though the admission cost him something. "Since that night in the library, I have thought of little else. I did not know what to say to that. I did not know what I was supposed to say. So I remained silent, my heart pounding, my palms damp with perspiration." He turned then, and the look on his face was not what I had expected. There was no coldness there, no arrogance. Instead, I saw something raw and unguarded, something almost like pain. He looked at me as though I were a puzzle he could not solve, a riddle that tormented him in the dark hours of the night. "Tell me," he said, crossing the room to stand before me. "Tell me why I cannot stop thinking about you. Tell me why, when I look at Lady Clarissa, all I see is your face. Tell me why I would throw away everything I have been taught to value for the chance to know you." "Your Grace," I whispered, and my voice broke on the words. "You should not say such things. It is not proper. I am not. I am nothing." "You are not nothing," he said fiercely, and his hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing across my skin with a gentleness that made tears spring to my eyes. "You are not nothing to me." And then he kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss, not the restrained, chaste touch I might have imagined a man like him would bestow. It was desperate and hungry, a kiss that spoke of weeks of restraint finally breaking, of desire held in check for far too long. His hands framed my face, holding me as though I were something precious, something fragile. And I felt myself dissolve beneath the onslaught of sensation, felt every thought, every doubt, every fear melt away until there was nothing in the world but him and the heat of his mouth on mine. I should have pushed him away. I should have remembered my place, remembered the unbridgeable gulf between us, but I did not. Instead, I kissed him back with all the longing I had kept locked inside, with all the hopeless love I had hidden even from myself. My hands found his chest, felt the hard muscle beneath the fine linen of his shirt, felt the racing of his heart that matched my own. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathing hard, both trembling. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, his breath warm against my lips. "God help me," he whispered. "I should not want you, but I do. I want you more than I have ever wanted anything in my life." "This is madness," I said, even as my hands clutched at his shirt, even as I leaned into him, unable to make myself step away. "You are a duke. I am a servant. This cannot be." "I know," he said, and there was anguish in his voice. "I know what it means. I know what it will cost. But I cannot stop. Tell me you feel it too. Tell me I am not alone in this madness." I looked up at him, at the desperate hope in his eyes, at the vulnerability he was showing me, and I could not lie. Not to him, not about this. "You are not alone," I whispered. Something in him seemed to break at those words. He pulled me to him, his arms wrapping around me, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. And I clung to him, burying my face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the solid strength of him beneath my hands. For that moment, that stolen, impossible moment, I allowed myself to believe that this could be real, that love could be enough to bridge the chasm between us. But even as I held him, even as I felt his heart beating against mine, I knew the truth. Love was not enough. It had never been enough. The world did not care about love. It cared about propriety, about reputation, about the invisible lines that separated people like him from people like me. And those lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. We met like that for weeks. Secret meetings in the dead of night, stolen hours when the rest of the household slept. He would send for me, and I would go to him, slipping through the dark corridors like a ghost, always afraid of discovery, always knowing that each encounter might be our last. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood, about the weight of expectation that had been placed on his shoulders from birth, about the loneliness of his position. I told him about my dreams, the books I loved, the life I had imagined for myself before I learned that such dreams were not for girls like me. And we touched. God help us, we touched. His hands learned the shape of me, the curve of my waist, the softness of my hair when he pulled it loose from its pins. My hands learned the planes of his face, the strength of his jaw, the way his breath caught when I kissed the hollow of his throat. We did not speak of what it meant, did not acknowledge the dangerous path we were walking. We simply existed in those stolen moments, pretending that the world outside that room did not exist. But of course, it did exist. And it was only a matter of time before reality came crashing down around us. It was Mrs. Dalton who noticed first. I saw the way she watched me, her eyes sharp and assessing, taking in the shadows beneath my eyes, the flush that rose to my cheeks when the Duke passed me in the corridor. She said nothing at first, but I felt her suspicion like a weight on my shoulders, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. And then, one morning, she called me to her sitting room. "Sit down," she said, her voice cold and clipped. I sat, my hands folded in my lap, my heart in my throat. I knew what was coming. I had known from the moment she summoned me. "I have been in service at Ashford Hall for 30 years, she said, her gaze boring into me. "I have seen girls like you come and go, girls who think they are special, who think they can rise above their station through beauty or charm or sheer audacity. And do you know what happens to those girls?" I said nothing. I could not have spoken if I tried. "They are ruined," she continued, her voice hard as iron. "They are cast out, left to fend for themselves with nothing and no one. The men who use them move on without a second thought, and the girls are left to suffer the consequences alone. Is that what you want? Is that the future you have chosen for yourself?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet her eyes. "I have done nothing wrong," I said, though my voice shook. "Haven't you?" she asked, and there was something almost like pity in her expression now. "I have eyes, girl. I have seen the way you look at him. And I have seen the way he looks at you. It does not matter if you think you have done nothing wrong. What matters is what people will believe, and they will believe the worst. They always do." She was right. I knew she was right, but knowing it did not make it any easier to bear. "You will leave," she said, and it was not a request. "You will leave quietly, without fuss, and you will be grateful that I am giving you this chance. I will write you a reference, though God knows you do not deserve it. But you must go. Today. Before this goes any further." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I stood on trembling legs and made my way to the door, but her voice stopped me before I could leave. "One more thing," she said. "Whatever you think you mean to him, whatever he has told you, remember this. Men like the Duke do not marry girls like you. They use them, and when they are done, they discard them. Do not make the mistake of thinking you are different." I fled to my room and packed my few belongings with shaking hands. I told myself Mrs. Dalton was wrong, that what the Duke and I had was real, that he would not simply let me go. But even as I thought it, I knew the truth. He had never spoken of a future. He had never promised me anything beyond those stolen moments. And why would he? I was a maid. He was a Duke. There could be no future for us, no happy ending to this story. I left a note for him, placed it on his desk when I was certain he was out riding. I told him I was leaving, that it was for the best, that he should forget me and marry someone suitable, someone who could give him the life he deserved. I told him I would never forget him, that he had given me something precious, even if it could not last. I told him goodbye, and then I walked away from Ashford Hall, carrying with me nothing but a small bag and a secret I did not yet know I held. A secret that would change everything. I was 3 weeks gone when I realized I was with child. His child. Growing inside me like a truth I could not escape, a consequence I would carry forever. I was alone in a rented room in a town whose name I barely knew, with no money, no prospects, and no one to turn to. I should have been terrified, and I was. But I was also, in some strange way, grateful. Because even if I could never have him, I would have this. A piece of him. A living reminder of those stolen nights when I had been, for a brief and shining moment, more than nothing. I did not know then that he was searching for me. I did not know that he had torn the countryside apart looking for me, that he had questioned every servant, every shopkeeper, every person who might have seen which direction I had gone. I did not know that my absence had done what my presence never could. It had broken him, and a broken man is a dangerous thing. The village of Thornfield was small and unremarkable, the kind of place where strangers were noticed but not necessarily welcomed. I arrived there on a cold November morning, my meager savings nearly depleted, my body already beginning to show the subtle signs of the life growing within me. I told the landlady of the boarding house that I was a widow, that my husband had died in an accident and left me with nothing but his name and a child on the way. She looked at me with skepticism, her eyes lingering on my ringless finger, but she took my money and gave me a room at the top of the stairs, small and drafty but clean enough. I found work at a dressmaker's shop, hemming and mending garments for the local gentry. The pay was pitiful, barely enough to cover my rent and a single meal a day, but I was grateful for it. Mrs. Hemming, the dressmaker, was a stern woman with sharp eyes and sharper words, but she did not ask too many questions. She saw that I could sew a fine seam, that my hands were steady and my work precise, and that was enough for her. The other girls at the shop whispered about me when they thought I could not hear. They speculated about my past, about the mysterious husband who had left me in such circumstances, about whether I was truly respectable or simply another fallen woman trying to hide her shame. I ignored them as best I could, kept my head down, my hands busy. I had learned in my time at Ashford Hall that survival often meant making yourself invisible, unremarkable, beneath notice. But at night, alone in my narrow bed, I could not ignore the truth. I was carrying the Duke's child, Edward's child, a baby conceived in stolen passion and impossible love, a baby who would be born into a world that would never accept him, never acknowledge his father, never give him the name or the inheritance that should have been his by right. I placed my hand on my still flat belly and wondered what kind of life I could give this child, wondered if love would be enough when we had nothing else. I thought of Edward constantly, though I tried not to. I wondered if he had received my note, if he had been angry or relieved when he discovered I was gone. I told myself he had probably forgotten me already, had moved on to find a suitable bride, someone who could stand beside him without shame, someone who belonged in his world. It was better this way, I told myself. Better for him, better for the child, better for everyone. But late at night, when sleep would not come, I allowed myself to remember the way his hands had felt on my skin, the sound of his voice when he whispered my name, the look in his eyes when he told me I was not nothing. Those memories were all I had left of him, and I held them close like precious jewels, knowing that one day, when my child was old enough to ask about his father, I would have to find the words to explain what we had been to each other and why it had not been enough. Winter came early that year, bringing with it bitter cold and snow that piled high in the streets. My belly began to swell, no longer something I could hide beneath the folds of my dress. Mrs. Hemming noticed, of course. She called me into her office one afternoon, her face set in hard lines. "How far along are you?" she asked without preamble. 5 months, I said quietly. She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I should dismiss you," she said finally. "A respectable establishment cannot employ a woman in your condition, widow or not. It sets a bad example for the other girls." I felt my heart sink. I had known this moment would come, but I had hoped to hold on to my position a bit longer, to save a bit more money before I was forced out onto the streets. "Please," I said, hating the desperation in my voice. "I will work harder. I will take on extra projects. I need this position. I have nowhere else to go." She sighed, a long, weary sound. "I am not a cruel woman," she said, "but I am a practical one. You may stay until the baby comes. After that, you must find other arrangements. I cannot have an infant crying in my workroom, disturbing the customers. Do you understand?" I understood. I thanked her and returned to my work, my hands shaking as I threaded my needle. I had perhaps 3 more months. 3 months to figure out how I would feed myself and a newborn child. 3 months to find some miracle that would save us from destitution. But miracles, I had learned, rarely came when you needed them most. It was on a day in late January, when the world was locked in ice and the wind howled like a living thing, that everything changed. I was walking back to my boarding house after a long day at the shop, my shawl pulled tight against the cold, my feet numb in my worn boots. The streets were nearly empty, most sensible people having retreated indoors to their fires. I hurried along, eager to reach my room, when I heard the sound of horses and carriage wheels behind me. I stepped aside to let the carriage pass, but instead it slowed, then stopped altogether. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a fine coat and top hat, clearly a gentleman of means. But it was not his appearance that made my heart stop. It was the way he looked at me, his eyes widening with recognition, and something else, something that looked almost like relief. "You," he said, his voice sharp. "You are from Ashford Hall." I stared at him, my mind racing. I did not recognize him at first, but then I saw the Ashford crest on the carriage door, and my stomach dropped. He was one of the Duke's associates, a man I had seen at the house during various gatherings, though I had never learned his name. "I do not know what you mean," I said, taking a step back. "You must have me confused with someone else." "Do not lie to me," he said, his voice gentling slightly. "I remember you. You worked there for years. And then you disappeared. And the Duke went half mad looking for you." I felt the blood drain from my face. "He looked for me?" I whispered. "Looked for you?" the man said, and he almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. "He has done nothing but look for you. He sent men to every town and village within 100 miles. He questioned everyone who might have known where you went. He has been like a man possessed, convinced that some harm had come to you, that you were in danger." I shook my head, unable to process what he was saying. "That cannot be true." I left. I made it clear that I wanted to go, that it was my choice. "Your choice or not, he does not accept it," the man said. "He wants you back. He needs to know you are safe. And I, being the loyal friend that I am going to take you to him." "No," I said quickly, my hand instinctively moving to my belly, trying to shield it from his view, though it was too late. His eyes followed the movement, and I saw understanding dawn in his expression. "Dear God," he said softly, "you are with child." His child? I said nothing, but my silence was answer enough. He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking older, wearier. "This changes everything," he said. "You must come with me. You cannot stay here, not like this. The Duke will want to know. He has a right to know." "He has no rights," I said, my voice breaking. "I am nothing to him, a mistake, a moment of weakness. He is a duke. I am a servant. There is no place for me in his world, and there never will be. Please, I beg you, let me go. Pretend you never saw me." But even as I spoke, I knew it was hopeless. The man shook his head slowly, his expression sympathetic, but resolute. "I cannot do that," he said. I cannot keep this from him. It would destroy him. You do not understand what he has been like these past months. He has refused every social engagement, turned away every woman his family has tried to push on him. He speaks of nothing but finding you, of making things right. Whether you believe it or not, you matter to him. And this child, his voice softened, this child matters too. Tears stung my eyes, hot and bitter. What good will it do? I asked. Even if he wants me, even if he claims the child, society will never accept it. I will be his mistress at best, his shame at worst, and the child will be a bastard, forever marked by the circumstances of his birth. Is that the life you think he would want for us? I do not know what he wants, the man admitted, but I know he deserves the chance to decide for himself. Come with me. Let him see you, speak with you. If after that you still wish to leave, if he does not offer you what you need, then I will help you. I will give you money, arrange passage to another city, somewhere you can start fresh. But you must give him this chance. I stood there in the frozen street, my mind a chaos of fear and hope and desperate longing. Part of me wanted to run, to disappear into the crowd and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still loved him despite everything, wanted to see him again. Wanted to know if what this man said was true, if Edward truly had been searching for me, if I had mattered to him as more than a passing fancy. And there was the child to think of. My child, his child, who deserved a father if one could be had, who deserved a chance at something better than the poverty and struggle I could offer alone. Very well, I said finally, my voice barely audible over the wind. I will come, but I make no promises beyond that. The man nodded and helped me into the carriage. It was warm inside, luxuriously appointed, so different from the cold, harsh world I had been living in. I sank back against the velvet cushions and closed my eyes, trying to prepare myself for what was to come. The journey to Ashford Hall took 2 days. We stopped at an inn the first night, and the man, who finally introduced himself as Lord Pemberton, arranged for a private room and a hot meal. He treated me with kindness and respect, never once making me feel like the fallen woman I knew others would see when they looked at me. He told me about Edward, about how the Duke had changed since my departure, how he had become withdrawn and melancholy, how he had stopped caring about the estate, about his duties, about anything except finding me. I did not know if I believed all of it. Men like Edward did not pine for servant girls. But Lord Pemberton seemed sincere, and there was a part of me that wanted desperately to believe that I had meant something, that our time together had not been merely a diversion for him. When we finally arrived at Ashford Hall, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. The house looked exactly as I remembered it, imposing and beautiful, its stone walls dark against the gray winter sky. Lord Pemberton helped me from the carriage and led me not to the servants' entrance as I had expected, but to the front door. A footman opened it, his eyes widening when he saw me. He started to say something, but Lord Pemberton cut him off. "Where is the Duke?" he asked. "In his study, sir," the footman said, still staring at me. "He has been there since morning, refusing all visitors." "Not any more," Lord Pemberton said. He turned to me. "Are you ready?" I nodded, though I was not ready at all, could never be ready for this. He led me through the familiar corridors, past rooms I had cleaned 100 times, past paintings and tapestries I had dusted and polished. It felt strange to walk through these spaces as a guest rather than a servant, strange to know that in moments I would face the man I had been running from, the man I had never stopped loving. Lord Pemberton stopped outside the study door. He knocked once, firmly. "Go away," came Edward's voice from within, rough and weary. "I am afraid I cannot do that," Lord Pemberton said, opening the door. "I have brought someone to see you." He stepped aside, and I walked into the room. Edward was standing by the window, his back to the door, just as he had been that first night in the library. He did not turn around. "I told you I am not receiving visitors," he said, his voice cold and flat. "Edward," I said softly. He froze. For a long moment, he did not move, did not breathe. And then, slowly, as though he could not quite believe what he was hearing, he turned around. The look on his face when he saw me was something I will never forget. Shock, disbelief, joy, anger, all of it flashing across his features in the space of a heartbeat. And then he was moving, crossing the room in 3 long strides. And I was in his arms, and he was holding me so tightly I could barely breathe, his face buried in my hair, his body shaking with emotion. "I thought you were dead," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I thought something terrible had happened to you. I searched everywhere, everywhere. Why did you leave me? Why did you go?" "I had to," I said, tears streaming down my face. "There was no place for me here, no future for us." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his hands framing my face, his eyes searching mine. "You are my future," he said fiercely. "Do you not understand that? I do not care about society, about propriety, about what anyone thinks. I love you. I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you if you will let me." And then his eyes dropped, and he saw what I had been trying to hide. His hands moved to my belly, hesitant, questioning. He looked back up at me, and I saw wonder in his eyes, and fear, and something that looked almost like reverence. "Is it mine?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," I said. And in that moment, everything changed. Edward's hands remained on my belly, gentle and reverent, as though he were touching something sacred. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, his face transformed by an emotion so raw and powerful that it took my breath away. He sank slowly to his knees before me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his head resting against the swell of my stomach where our child grew. "I am going to be a father," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "We are going to have a child." I placed my hands in his hair, stroking the dark strands, feeling the tremor that ran through his body. "Yes," I said softly. "But Edward, you must understand what this means, what it will cost you." He looked up at me then, his jaw set with determination. "I do not care what it costs," he said. "I will not lose you again. I will not lose this child. You will marry me." I pulled away from him, shaking my head, even as my heart yearned to say yes, to believe that such a thing could be possible. "We cannot marry," I said. "I am a servant. You are a duke. The scandal would destroy you, destroy your family name, everything you have worked for." He rose to his feet, his hands gripping my shoulders, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Let it be destroyed," he said fiercely. "What good is a name, a title, a fortune, if I must live without you? What good is any of it if I cannot claim the woman I love, the child we created together? I would give it all up, every last bit of it, to be with you." "You say that now," I said, tears streaming down my face. "But what about in a year, in 5 years, when society has turned its back on you, when your family has disowned you, when your friends no longer receive you? Will you still feel the same then? Or will you come to resent me for what you lost?" "I could never resent you," he said, and there was such conviction in his voice that I almost believed him. "You are the only real thing in my life. Everything else is pretense, performance, playing a role I never chose. But with you, I am myself. With you, I am free." "Edward," I whispered, wanting so desperately to believe him, to trust that love could be enough to overcome the impossible barriers between us. He pulled me close, pressing his lips to my forehead, my cheeks, my lips, gentle kisses that tasted of salt and desperation. "Marry me," he said again. "Be my wife. Let me give our child my name, my protection, everything I have. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy, proving to you that you were worth any sacrifice." Before I could answer, the study door burst open. A woman swept into the room, elegant and imperious, her silk skirts rustling, her expression one of barely controlled rage. I recognized her immediately, though I had only seen her from a distance during my time at Ashford Hall. The Dowager Duchess, Edward's mother. She stopped short when she saw us, her eyes taking in my disheveled appearance, Edward's protective stance before me, the obvious intimacy between us. Her face went pale, then flushed with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. "Who is this woman, and why is she in my son's study unchaperoned?" "Mother," Edward said, his voice cold and formal, "I was not aware you had arrived. I came as soon as I received word that you had returned from wherever you have been hiding these past months," she said. "I came to remind you of your duties, your responsibilities to this family, and I find you here with some common girl." She looked at me with such contempt that I felt it like a physical blow. "I suppose she is one of the servants. Have you taken to dallying with the help now, Edward? Have you no sense of decency, of propriety?" "She is not some common girl," Edward said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She is the woman I love, and she is carrying my child." The silence that followed was absolute. The Dowager stared at us, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally, cold calculation. She moved closer, her eyes assessing me with the same critical eye one might use to evaluate livestock at market. "How convenient," she said finally, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A servant girl, pregnant and desperate, and my son, always so noble, so eager to do the right thing. Tell me, girl, how much will it take to make you disappear? Name your price. I am prepared to be generous." I felt as though she had slapped me. I opened my mouth to respond, but Edward spoke first, his voice like thunder. "You will not speak to her that way," he said. "You will show her the respect she deserves, or you will leave this house immediately." "I will do no such thing," the Dowager snapped. "I am your mother, Edward. I have given my life to preserving this family's legacy, to ensuring that you would take your rightful place in society. And I will not stand by and watch you throw it all away for some sordid affair with a woman beneath your station." "She is not beneath me," Edward said, and there was steel in his voice now, a hardness I had never heard before. "If anything, I am the one who is unworthy of her. She has more courage, more integrity, more genuine goodness in her little finger than you have in your entire body, and I will marry her, with or without your blessing." The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "If you do this," she said slowly, "if you marry this girl, you will be cut off. Not a penny, not an acre of land, nothing. Your father's will is very clear on that point. Should you marry beneath your station without the family's consent, you forfeit your inheritance. Is that what you want? To be penniless, disgraced, cast out from everything you have ever known?" I felt Edward tense beside me. I had not known about the will, had not understood the full extent of what he would be giving up. I turned to him, placing my hand on his arm. "Edward," I said softly, "you cannot do this. Your inheritance, your title, your place in the world, you cannot throw it all away. Not for me." He looked down at me, and the expression on his face was one of absolute certainty. "Watch me," he said. "You are being a fool," the Dowager said, her voice shaking with rage. "This girl has bewitched you, made you forget who you are, what you owe to your family. When the spell breaks, when you realize what you have done, it will be too late. You will have nothing, and she will have everything she schemed for." "I did not scheme for anything," I said quietly, finding my voice at last. "I did not ask for his love. I did not ask for this child. I left because I knew there could be no future for us. I left to spare him this very choice. But he found me, and now here we are." The Dowager studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps you are not as calculating as I thought," she said finally. "Perhaps you are simply naive. But it does not matter. The result is the same. If Edward marries you, he loses everything. His title will pass to a distant cousin, one far less scrupulous about preserving the family honor. Ashford Hall will fall into ruin. The estate, which has been in our family for 300 years, will be sold off piece by piece to pay debts. Is that what you want? To be responsible for the destruction of everything Edward's ancestors built? Her words struck home, awakening all the doubts and fears I had been trying to suppress. I looked around the study, at the portraits of Edward's forebears lining the walls, at the books and furnishings that spoke of centuries of history and tradition. How could I ask him to give this up? How could I let him sacrifice his entire world for me? Edward seemed to sense my wavering. He turned me to face him, his hands gentle on my shoulders. "Look at me," he said. "Not at her, not at the house, not at any of this. Look at me." I met his eyes, saw the love there, the certainty, the absolute determination. "I do not want any of this without you," he said. "The title, the house, the money, none of it means anything if I cannot share it with you. And if I must choose between keeping these things and having you, having our child, then there is no choice at all. You are my choice. You will always be my choice." "But what about our child?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What kind of life can we give him if we have nothing? How will we survive?" "We will find a way," he said. "I can work. I can manage an estate for someone else, or teach, or do whatever is necessary. We will be together, and that is all that matters. Our child will be loved. He will grow up knowing that his father chose his mother because he loved her more than wealth or position, more than anything. Is that not a better legacy than a title and an empty house?" I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But the Dowager's words echoed in my mind, filling me with doubt. "Perhaps there is another way," the Dowager said suddenly, and there was something calculating in her expression now, something that made me wary. "Edward need not marry you to provide for the child. He can settle money on you, ensure you and the baby are taken care of. Give the child his name if he insists. You can live comfortably, quietly, in some discreet location where no one knows your history. And Edward can do his duty, marry appropriately, secure the family's future. Everyone benefits." "Except me," Edward said coldly. "I do not benefit from being separated from the woman I love, from seeing my child only in secret, from living a lie for the rest of my life. Your solution benefits no one but you and your precious reputation." "Think of the child," the Dowager pressed. "Think of what it would mean for him to grow up as a bastard, even if acknowledged. He will never be fully accepted, never have the opportunities he deserves. But if Edward marries well, if he has legitimate heirs, then perhaps this child can be brought into the family later. Given a position, educated properly. Would that not be better for him?" I felt sick. She was right, in a horrible way. A child born out of wedlock, even to a duke, would always be marked by that stigma. He would be neither fully accepted by the upper classes nor truly part of the world I came from. He would exist in a liminal space, belonging nowhere. But the thought of Edward marrying someone else, of watching him build a life with another woman while I lived in some cottage somewhere, raising our child alone, was more than I could bear. "I need to think," I said, pulling away from Edward, my mind reeling. "I need time to consider what is best." "There is nothing to consider," Edward said. "I have made my decision." "But I have not made mine," I said, my voice firmer now. "This is my life too, Edward, my child's life. I will not be rushed into a decision that affects us all so profoundly. Give me time, please." He looked as though I had struck him, but he nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "Take whatever time you need, but know this, my decision will not change. I will wait for you. I will wait as long as it takes, but I will not give you up. Not now, not ever." The Dowager looked between us, her expression sour. "You are both fools," she said. "But I can see I will get nowhere with either of you today. I will retire to my rooms. When you have come to your senses, Edward, we will speak again." She swept from the room, leaving Edward and me alone once more. He reached for me, but I stepped back, needing space to think, to breathe. Lord Pemberton arranged for me to stay in one of the guest rooms, a beautiful chamber with a canopied bed and a fire that kept the winter chill at bay. It was strange to be in Ashford Hall as a guest rather than a servant, strange to be waited on by girls I had once worked alongside. They looked at me with curiosity and confusion, unsure of my status, unsure of how to treat me. I saw the whispers, the speculative glances, and knew that by tomorrow, the entire household would know I was here, would know about the baby, would be placing bets on what the Duke would do. That night, I could not sleep. I stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit grounds, my hand resting on my belly where the baby moved and kicked, increasingly active as I grew closer to my time. I thought about everything the Dowager had said, about the choice Edward was willing to make, about what would be best for this child I carried. I loved Edward. God knows I loved him with every fiber of my being. But was love enough? Could love truly overcome the vast divide between our worlds? And even if it could, even if we found a way to be happy together, what about our child? What kind of future would he have, caught between two worlds, accepted by neither? There was a soft knock at my door. I turned, expecting a maid, but it was Edward. He stood in the doorway, still fully dressed, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. "I could not stay away," he said simply. "May I come in?" I nodded, and he entered, closing the door softly behind him. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. "I am afraid," I admitted finally. "I am afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of ruining your life, afraid of failing our child." He crossed to me, gathering me into his arms. "You could never fail," he said softly. "You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known. Whatever you decide, whatever you choose, I will support you. But please, please do not shut me out. Do not make this decision alone. We are in this together." I leaned into him, drawing strength from his warmth, his solidity. "Tell me honestly," I said, "if you give up everything for me, for this child, will you truly be happy? Or will there be a part of you that regrets it, that resents us for what you lost?" He was silent for a long moment, and I held my breath, waiting for his answer. "I will not lie to you," he said finally. "It will be hard. There will be moments when I miss this life, when I grieve for what I have lost. But I know myself. I know that the regret I would feel for losing you would be infinitely greater than any regret I might feel for losing a title or a fortune. Because those things are just things. But you are everything. And if our child is shunned by society," I asked, "if he suffers because of the choice we made, then we will teach him that his worth is not determined by what society thinks of him," Edward said. "We will teach him to be strong, to be kind, to value character over status. We will give him so much love that he will never doubt his place in our hearts, even if the world refuses him a place in theirs." I closed my eyes, feeling tears slip down my cheeks. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love could be enough, that we could build a life together despite everything arrayed against us. "Marry me," he said again, his voice soft but insistent. "Tomorrow, next week, whenever you are ready, stand before God and the world and become my wife. Let me give you and our child my name, my protection, everything I am. Please." I looked up at him, at this man who was willing to sacrifice everything for me, and I knew that I could not make him choose between his love for me and his duty to his family. But I also knew that I could not live without him, could not raise our child without his father, could not deny the love that had brought us to this impossible moment. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy that lit his face was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. He lifted me off my feet, spinning me in a circle, laughing and crying at once. And for that moment, that perfect, shining moment, I let myself believe that everything would be all right, that love truly could conquer all. But even as I clung to him, even as I let myself imagine a future together, I could not quite silence the voice of doubt that whispered in the back of my mind, reminding me that fairy tales rarely came true for girls like me. We were married 3 days later in the small chapel on the estate, with only Lord Pemberton and his wife as witnesses. The dowager refused to attend, had in fact left Ashford Hall the morning after our confrontation, her parting words a cold promise that Edward would regret his choice. But on that gray February morning, as I stood before the altar in a simple dress of ivory muslin, Edward's hand clasped firmly in mine, I could think of nothing but the man beside me and the vows we were about to make. The ceremony was brief, the words familiar, and yet weighted with a significance I had never imagined I would experience. Edward's voice was steady as he pledged himself to me, his eyes never leaving mine, and when it came my turn to speak, I found that my own voice did not waver. I meant every word. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. When the vicar pronounced us husband and wife, Edward kissed me with such tenderness that tears sprang to my eyes. "You are mine now," he whispered against my lips, "and I am yours. Nothing can change that." We spent our wedding night in his chambers, the same rooms I had once cleaned as a servant, now transformed into a sanctuary where I belonged not as help, but as his wife. He was gentle with me, mindful of my condition, his hands reverent as they traced the swell of my belly where our child grew. "I love you," he said over and over, as though the words could not be spoken enough times. "I love you both." In those first days of our marriage, I allowed myself to be happy. Edward was attentive and devoted, spending every moment he could spare with me, making plans for the baby's arrival, talking about the future we would build together. He had already begun making arrangements, consulting with Lord Pemberton about positions that might be suitable, properties that could be rented or purchased with what money he had managed to set aside before the dowager's threats came to fruition. But reality, as it always does, intruded upon our happiness. The notice of our marriage appeared in the papers within the week, and the scandal was immediate and devastating. Letters arrived by the dozens, most of them venomous, condemning Edward for his disgraceful alliance, for throwing away his position and honor for a woman so far beneath him. Former friends cut him in the street. Invitations that had once been plentiful dried up overnight. The dowager made good on her promise, and Edward's solicitor confirmed that the terms of his father's will were clear and binding. By marrying without his family's consent, Edward had forfeited his inheritance, his title, and his claim to Ashford Hall. I watched as the world he had known crumbled around him and guilt ate at me like a cancer. He tried to hide it from me, tried to maintain a cheerful facade, but I saw the strain in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he would stare out the windows at the estate that was no longer his, grief written plain on his face. "We have to leave," he told me one evening as we sat together in the library, the room that held so many memories for both of us. "The new heir has given us a month to vacate the premises. It is more generous than I expected, truth be told." "Where will we go?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "Lord Pemberton has offered us a cottage on his estate in Derbyshire," Edward said. "It is small but comfortable, and he has work for me managing some of his properties. It will not be what you deserve, but it will be a start." "What I deserve," I repeated softly. "Edward, I was a maid. A cottage and honest work is more than I ever dreamed of having. You are the one who deserves better than this." He took my hand, pressing it to his lips. "I have everything I need," he said. "I have you." But I could see the lie in his eyes, could see the grief he was trying so hard to hide. and I knew that no matter how much he loved me, a part of him would always mourn what he had lost. The move to Derbyshire came in early March, just weeks before my confinement. The cottage Lord Pemberton had provided was indeed small, just 4 rooms, but it was clean and well appointed, and the countryside around it was beautiful in a wild, rugged way. Edward threw himself into his work with a determination that bordered on desperation, rising before dawn and returning long after dark, exhausted and covered in mud. He was managing tenant farms, overseeing repairs, doing the kind of physical labor he had never been trained for, and I could see it taking a toll on him. But he never complained. He would come home each evening, wash up, and sit with me by the fire, his hand resting on my belly, talking to the baby about the future, about the life we would have together. He was trying so hard to make this work, to prove that his choice had been the right one, and my heart broke for him even as I loved him more than ever. Our son was born on a rainy night in April, after 12 hours of labor that left me weak and trembling, but filled with a joy I had never known existed. Edward was there throughout, holding my hand, wiping my brow, whispering encouragement and love. When the midwife finally placed the baby in my arms, when I looked down at that tiny, perfect face, I felt something shift inside me. This was why. This was what it had all been for. Edward knelt beside the bed, his finger gently stroking our son's cheek, his eyes bright with tears. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "Perfect. What shall we name him?" We had discussed names during the long months of my pregnancy, but none of them had felt quite right. Now, looking at this child who was the living embodiment of our love, the answer came to me clearly. "Thomas," I said, "after your father." Edward looked up at me, surprise and emotion warring in his expression. "Are you certain?" he asked. "After everything with my mother, with the inheritance." "Your father loved you," I said gently. "And whatever choices your mother made, whatever conditions were in that will, they were her doing, not his. Our son should carry that name. Should know that he comes from a line of good men, whatever else the world may say about his birth." Edward bowed his head, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me him, for giving me a family." In the months that followed, we settled into a rhythm that was at once strange and comforting. Edward continued his work for Lord Pemberton, and I cared for Thomas and kept our small cottage as best I could. We had none of the luxuries I had once served to others, none of the finery or status, but we had each other, and we had our son, and somehow that was enough. But I could see the weight Edward carried, could see the way he watched other gentlemen when we went to the village, the longing in his eyes when he passed the great houses where he had once been welcomed. He loved us, I never doubted that, but love could not erase the loss of everything he had known, everything he had been raised to be. It was nearly a year after Thomas's birth when everything changed once more. We were sitting down to dinner, a simple meal of bread and stew, when there was a knock at the door. Edward answered it and returned moments later with a letter, his face pale, his hands shaking. "What is it?" I asked, rising from my chair in alarm. "My mother," he said, his voice barely audible. "She is dying. She wants to see me." I felt my heart clench. After everything she had done, everything she had said, part of me wanted to tell him to burn the letter, to refuse her request as she had refused to acknowledge our marriage. But I saw the conflict in his eyes, saw the love that still existed beneath all the hurt and anger, and I knew what I had to do. "You should go," I said quietly. He looked at me, searching my face. "Come with me," he said. "Both of you, please." And so we made the journey back to Ashford Hall, Thomas bundled in my arms, Edward tense and silent beside me in the carriage Lord Pemberton had once again generously provided. The house looked different somehow, smaller than I remembered, and as we entered through the front door, I felt like a ghost returning to haunt the scene of my former life. The dowager was in her chambers, propped up on pillows, her face gray and drawn with illness, but her eyes were still sharp, still fierce, and they fixed on me as we entered, then moved to the baby in my arms. "So," she said, her voice weak but cutting, "you have come, and you have brought the child." Edward moved to stand beside her bed, his expression carefully neutral. "You asked to see me, Mother. I am here." She studied him for a long moment, and something in her expression softened. "You look terrible," she said, "worn and tired and old before your time." "I am managing," he said stiffly. "Are you?" she asked. "Are you truly happy, Edward, living in that cottage, doing work you were never meant to do, while the woman you married watches you destroy yourself trying to prove that love is enough?" I opened my mouth to protest, but Edward spoke first. "I made my choice," he said, "and I stand by it." "Even if it is killing you?" the dowager asked. "Even if every day you wake up and mourn what you have lost?" "Do not lie to me, Edward. I am dying. I deserve the truth." "The truth," Edward said quietly, "is that I love my wife. I love my son. And yes, I miss my old life. I miss this house. I miss the work I was trained to do. I miss feeling as though I have a purpose beyond mere survival. But I would make the same choice again, because without them, none of the rest of it mattered anyway." The dowager closed her eyes. "I was wrong," she said, and the admission seemed to cost her greatly. "I thought you were being weak, foolish, throwing away your birthright for a moment's passion. But I see now that I underestimated what you felt for her, what you feel." She opened her eyes and looked at me. "Come here, girl. Let me see the child." I hesitated, then moved closer, holding Thomas out so she could see him. He was nearly a year old now, with his father's dark hair and gray eyes, beautiful and perfect in every way. The dowager reached out a trembling hand and touched his cheek. "He has the Ashford eyes," she said softly, "and the Ashford stubbornness, if his wail is any indication." She looked up at me. "You have taken good care of him, and of my son." "I have tried," I said quietly. She nodded. "Before I die," she said, "I am going to do something I should have done a year ago. I am going to acknowledge this child as my grandson. I am going to see that he is provided for, that he has a future. And I am going to reinstate Edward's inheritance." Edward stared at her in shock. "You cannot do that," he said. "Father's will." "Your father's will gave me discretion," she interrupted, "and I choose to exercise it. You married without consent, yes, but I am giving that consent now, retroactively if need be. The estate will be yours again, Edward. Ashford Hall will be yours. This is your son, your heir. Let him have what is rightfully his." I felt tears streaming down my face. "Why?" I asked. "Why now, after everything?" "Because I am dying," she said simply, "and I have had time to think about what truly matters. I spent my life protecting the family name, preserving the estate, making sure everything was as it should be. But what good is a name without people to carry it forward? What good is an estate without love to fill it? You love my son. You gave him a child. You made him happier than I ever saw him in all his years of doing his duty. Perhaps that is worth more than propriety after all." She died 3 days later, with Edward at her side. And true to her word, she had already set the legal mechanisms in motion to restore Edward's inheritance, to acknowledge Thomas as his legitimate heir, to undo the damage her pride and stubbornness had caused. We returned to Ashford Hall not as interlopers or outcasts, but as the Duke and Duchess, as the rightful owners of the estate. It should have felt like a triumph, like vindication, but instead I felt only a deep, aching sadness for all the time we had lost, all the suffering that could have been avoided if she had simply chosen love over pride from the beginning. But as Edward had once told me, we cannot change the past. We can only move forward, and move forward we did. Edward threw himself into the management of the estate with renewed vigor, implementing changes he had long wanted to make, modernizing the farms, improving conditions for the tenants. I found my place as mistress of Ashford Hall, no longer invisible but seen, respected, valued. It was strange at first, giving orders to women I had once worked beside, but I tried to be fair, to remember what it had been like to be in their position, to treat them with the dignity and kindness I had so often craved. Society was slower to accept us. There were those who would never forgive the scandal of our marriage, who would always see me as nothing more than an upstart servant who had trapped a duke. But there were others, like Lord Pemberton and his wife, who stood by us, who welcomed us into their homes and defended us against the gossips. And slowly, painfully, we carved out a place for ourselves in the world, not as we had been, but as we had chosen to become. Thomas grew into a beautiful, intelligent boy, beloved by his father and adored by the entire household. Edward was a devoted father, spending hours playing with him in the gardens, teaching him to ride, reading to him by the fire, and watching them together. Seeing the love that flowed so freely between them, I knew that we had made the right choice, that every hardship, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had been worth it to create this family, this life, this love. On a warm summer evening, 5 years after our wedding, I stood on the terrace of Ashford Hall, watching Edward and Thomas play on the lawn below. Thomas was laughing, his small legs pumping as he ran from his father, who chased him with exaggerated slowness, letting himself be caught and tackled into the grass. I placed my hand on my belly, where another child grew, a sibling for Thomas, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Edward looked up and saw me watching. He said something to Thomas, then made his way up to the terrace, his hair mussed, his shirt grass-stained, his face alight with joy. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping his arms around me from behind, his hands resting on the gentle swell of my stomach. "I am thinking about how far we have come," I said softly, "about how different our lives are from what either of us expected. Do you have any regrets?" he asked, and I heard the vulnerability in his voice, the fear that still lingered beneath the surface. I turned in his arms to face him. "Not a single one," I said. "Do you?" He kissed me, slow and sweet and filled with promise. "Every day with you is a gift," he said. "Every moment with our children is a blessing I never thought I would have. You saved me. You made me into the man I was always meant to be. How could I possibly regret that?" We stood there together as the sun set over the estate, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, our son's laughter drifting up from the garden, the future stretching out before us, full of possibility and hope. We had been tested by scandal and loss, by pride and prejudice, by every obstacle the world could throw at us, but we had survived, more than survived. We had built something real and lasting and true, and as Edward held me close, as I felt the flutter of new life within me, I knew with absolute certainty that love had been enough after all. Not because it had made everything easy, not because it had erased the challenges we had faced, but because it had given us the strength to face them together, to fight for what mattered, to choose each other over and over again, no matter the cost. I had been nothing when I first came to Ashford Hall, a shadow in the corridors, invisible and insignificant. But Edward had seen me. He had looked past my station, past the barriers the world had erected between us, and he had chosen me. Not despite who I was, but because of it. And in choosing me, he had given me everything. Not wealth or status or position, though those had come in time, but something far more precious. He had given me love. He had given me family. He had given me a place in the world where I belonged, not because of what I did or where I came from, but simply because I was his, and he was mine. That night, as we lay together in the great bed that had once seemed so impossible to imagine myself in, Edward held me close and whispered the same words he had spoken on our wedding day. "You are mine now, and I am yours. Nothing can change that. And I knew, with the certainty that comes from surviving the worst and emerging stronger, that he was right. We had fought for this love, had sacrificed for it, had been tested by it, and found worthy. And whatever challenges the future might bring, whatever trials we might yet face, we would face them together. Because some loves are worth fighting for, some loves are worth any price. And ours, forged in scandal and tempered by struggle, was one of them. It always had been. It always would be.